Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. It's the beginning of the end because today we start to explore the only motorway we've got left, the M25. It needs little introduction, but if you're not familiar, the M25 is a proper shit show of a 117-mile long orbital motorway that surrounds London, and it would be impossible to discuss the M25 without talking about the London Ringways project. This road building scheme was first thought up in the 1940s, but it would be in the 1960s that the London Ringways project would start to take shape. The plan was to build all of the motorways in and around London, and at the time it seemed like a very good idea, but as the years went on, people fell out of favour with the new motorway plan, and in 1973 the London Council saw a change of political direction, resulting in the cancellation of the project. Unfortunately, they'd already started constructing large sections of these motorways, meaning road planners had a little bit of a predicament. How do we make these new motorways that we have built useful when the project is no more? Well, they bodged it by simply connecting up what they'd already started. It at least resulted in one orbital motorway or ringway around London, and it's what gave birth to the M25. The M25 orbital motorway would officially be completed and opened in 1986, and according to one source, cost £7.5 million per mile, making it one of the most, if not the most expensive road construction projects in the UK. £7.5 million in 1986 is about £22 million today. The M25 starts at Junction 2 where it meets the A2, but why no Junction 1? Because A282. The A282, or Dartford crossing, was built before the M25, opening in 1963. The M25 is not actually a fully orbital motorway. It has a break for the Dartford crossing, which is classified as an A road to allow non-motorway traffic to cross the River Thames. If it was all under motorway regulations, you wouldn't be able to drive your tractor through the Dartford tunnel. In any case, Junction 1 is still missing, but if we have a look on the A282, we find Junctions 1A and 1B, which, if we think about the A282 and the M25 as one continuous route, it's a lot less confusing to have the junction numbers run in order, despite that meaning the M25 starts at Junction 2. The junction itself is known as the Dartford or Dartford interchange, and originally was your typical roundabout style interchange, but in 2008 it was modified with the addition of a set of free-flowing slip roads featuring a rather nice flyover. Just after Junction 3, or the Swanley interchange, is where the M25 takes a different route when compared to the original plan. According to the Ringways project, the motorway would have headed east into Croydon as Ringway 3, but that part was cancelled, and instead the M25 is built along the route we know today to stitch up the motorways so that it could be completed as an orbital motorway-ish. Part of that stitch-up involved building Junction 4 and an M25 spur. I've no idea why they decided to build a spur, but I suppose when you think about it, it works like a normal junction, just with some really long slip roads. The stitch-up of motorways continues down to Junction 5, which is why it's stupid. Originally, the junction was going to be a roundabout interchange where the M25 would go from east to west towards the M20, and the A21 would take care of the north to south movements. The problems came following the Ringways cancellation and that hastily thought out stitch-up. Because these roads had already been built or were at a point where they couldn't be changed, there was no option but to bolt on the solution and hope that it worked. Today, that solution means that in order to stay on the M25, you have to turn off the M25 and then rejoin the M25, and if you aren't paying attention, you'll arrive in Tunbridge Wells wondering what went wrong. Assuming you were paying attention, you'll now be heading east along the M25, and just after Junction 5, a section of the motorway was built along the course of an old railway, and where today we find an emergency access point to the motorway would have once been the site of Brasted Station. The station opened in 1881 and operated up until 1961, at which point it was closed due to low passenger numbers. The original station was demolished to make way for the M25, leaving no trace with the exception of the original station house, which is now a private residence with a beautiful view and handy access to the M25. And whilst it may not look like much, this patch of land used to be the location of the station's goods yard and siding. Between Junctions 5 and 6 is Roadchef's Clackett Lane Services. It opened in 1993, which is interesting because we can take a look at an old aerial photo from 1990 to see how things looked before the services was built. Interestingly, the services at Clackett Lane nearly wasn't built at all, it was the backup option. The original plan was to build the services just off Junction 5, but when things didn't work out how they had in mind, that was very quickly cancelled, and instead they built the backup option of Clackett Lane. Also interestingly, inside you'll find Roman remains and artefacts which were dug up when constructing the services, now preserved lovingly next to the toilets. The section of motorway between Junctions 6 and 8 is the the OG M25. Whilst the M25 orbital motorway would open in 1986, the first section would open in 1976, and with the motorway terminating here, a short dual carriageway was built to connect it to the A25. Junction 8 has a unique feature. It's got a slip road that's about 1.5 miles long. The reason is quite simple. At this point we're passing through Reigate Hill, which presents quite a steep gradient in motorway terms, and indeed this is the steepest point of the M25, making progress somewhat slow for larger and heavier vehicles. The slip road has been built to such a length so as to minimise the gradient as much as possible, making life a lot easier for trucks. However, when the junction first opened, it wasn't built like that. It was much shitter. It wouldn't be until the 1990s and the M25's widening works that the long slip road would be added. Just off Junction 8 and along Fort Lane is Reigate Fort. It was built in the 1890s at a time when we were scared that the French would invade and take over. Accordingly, a 72-mile-long defence chain was built to protect London, part of which included Reigate Fort. The fort was known as a mobilisation centre, storing tools and ammunition and anything else that would be required should the merde hit the ventilateur. The fort was decommissioned in 1906 because rather than wait for an invasion on land, England would just shoot the shit out of anybody trying to cross the channel with its ever-growing naval power. After Junction 8, the motorway twists and turns its way around Leatherhead, but according to the original plans, the motorway was supposed to take a different route through this area. As you pass under the B2032 road bridge, the motorway would have taken a left turn to go through Headley, passing Leatherhead to the south, and then through Fetcham before resuming its route somewhere around Cobham Services. The land was purchased and allocated, but today a lot of that's been built on, following the motorway being routed a different way. This does make me wonder about Junction 9. It was one of the last junctions to be built on the M25, and it's not what I would call desirable. If anything, it looks to me like a bit of an afterthought, which makes me think maybe Junction 9 was designed differently to go with that original M25 routing. The junction is effectively separated into two halves about a mile from one another. You've got access in all directions, so that's good, yet it doesn't look like they're struggling for space, so I've no idea why they built the junction like this. If you come off the M25 at Junction 10 and make a slight detour, you might find the former RAF Wisley Airfield. It was built during the small disagreement of 1939 to 1945, but it wouldn't be until 1952 that a proper tarmac runway was added. The airfield was mostly used for aircraft testing by Vickers Armstrong, who built their aircraft just up the road at Brooklands before carrying out their testing here at Wisley. Sadly, flying would come to an end in the early 1970s because the runway wasn't large enough to support the ever-increasing size of aircraft. All of the buildings on the site have now been demolished, except for this, which is some sort of electrical substation, I think. Not only that, the runway and hard standings are still in place, albeit in very poor condition. The most recent update for the site is that Taylor Wimpey have acquired it and are planning to build a couple of thousand houses here, which might go some way to explain the bullshittery that's going on at Junction 10 on the M25. If you've driven in this area recently, you'll know exactly what I mean. You can't build a load of houses without making some improvements to the surrounding road network, and at Junction 10 work is underway to make the Junction's roundabout slightly larger and to add an additional lane to the slip roads and the A3, because as we all know, adding more lanes solves all of your traffic problems. The 3-year project is costing £317 million, and when it's finished it won't make any difference at all. And there we are then guys, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there's a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. Until then, take care, bye bye.